Well, welcome back, everyone, to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. Today, I'm looking forward to sitting down with Jeremy Berman from Dream See Do, and we're going to be talking about a lot of things, which, based on the backstage conversation, there's going to be no shortage of fun and energy in the conversation. So I'm looking forward to it. But we're going to be talking about what it means to do full cycle talent development, and what that looks like and how we can do that digitally in a way that preserves the human experience in meaningful ways, and that it doesn't have to be a second grade experience. So I'm looking forward to it. Jeremy, I know I've been waiting. It's always fun when I go live on these because guests have been waiting a long time to be on. And so when I actually get the chance to do the live stream, it's super fun. So thanks so much for joining me.
Right on. Great to be here, man. Yeah, I'm excited as well. I've been looking forward to this, and I think we're gonna have a lot of fun and great things to chat about.
No, I never have any doubts about that. My energy level on these is always window blowing.
Awesome.
So for those who may not know who you are, though, little bit, because I'm always curious too in the founder story of backstory into, was this a childhood dream of yours that someday you would create a ed tech platform for developing talent? What is your backstory?
Yeah, not exactly, but it's
not exactly. Okay.
Yeah, it's in the dream is in the name, but I mean, I think it's one of those things where you don't realize as you're moving along in your life that maybe it was meant to be, right? You know, because I when I started Dream,
so it wasn't like blatant. You had a vision board as a child, and tech company was on it, but as you look back and reflect on some things, you see some parallels.
Oh yeah, and some lines of sort of a trajectory being formed. My mom reminded me when I started Dream See Do that I was like a peer counselor in high school, and all these things that you don't realize until the pieces come together. Yeah, I mean, I was a camp counselor. I taught swimming lessons. I was a lifeguard. I did all these different things where I was really
lifetime talent developer.
I think so. I mean, like mentorship as a mentor. I loved being a mentee. I've always sought out mentorship from various leaders, and I think the one thread, man, that is common is I've always had this very deep entrepreneurial spirit and vision. And so I think that had, as I grew up, I was doing like hand car washes with my friends one summer, and I was always working, having odd jobs to like make a buck and understand what it was like. And I think that was a great value system my parents instilled in me that was important. And I always had a propensity for it. But I was you can see it with my guitar. I was a music producer for years. And, I think that was a dream of mine. And honestly, maybe that was more of a dream, was to become like either a performing artist.
Okay. So now we got to unpack this. I told you, because coach, mentor, you were this developer of talent, had this entrepreneurial spirit. How did the music producer squeak in there? Or was that, I'm not even going to try and fill in the blanks.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a musician my whole life. I think my mom said I was like matching pitch at like 2 weeks, or it's cooing notes at like 2 weeks old and literally matching pitch at 2 years old. Yeah. It was very early. I had perfect pitch, I think, until I was 8. All kinds of crazy, interesting stories about singing. Had a group in high school. I can't believe we're talking about this, but an a cappella group that was kind of like, it'll date me a little bit, but kind of like Boys to Men. We had like a development deal offer. They want us to they want us to quit high school to like do this deal, and we're like, it's not really gonna happen. We're like all got into college. We're like second semester seniors, so we kind of like cried it out and said we're not doing this, but. We had a very musical and talented high school. In fact, like the valedictorian ended up being like the head writer of and creator of major TV shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine and stuff like that. So there's just a lot of talent there and a lot of musical talent. So it was something was in the water in our town. I think for my sister's years older than mine.
In a good way. Usually when people say there was something in the water, it's not always a good thing. So this was a good one.
This was potable.
Musical talent that magically sprinkled its way into the water treatment plant. I like it.
I had a magical musical experience in high school, and it was really profound and really influenced me. And I'll get to a little bit of the Dream See Do story, but when we started Dream See Do, I would tell kids about that because it was my dream. Really music was my dream. We kind of turned down that, it's a longer story, but like to save on time, like we turned down that offer in high school. And there was another time in my 20s where, there was an opportunity to become a performing artist, but I ended up becoming a music producer instead. And what's so interesting is my career, like you have these meandering paths, often as I worked in music, I loved it, but then, I realized that like it really wasn't making me happy, and I really wanted to make an impact. And there's a lot that surrounds it, but that's ultimately what led me to starting my company.
In many ways is part of the talent development journey, I think, for everybody. The number of people I've talked to as a leader of this, but then just also in my professional intersection of, I'm crazy curious about people's journeys.
Yeah.
Common theme is that everybody's journey is really different, but it is this, there's no clear map of, okay, this is exactly how it's going to go for people. And honestly, sometimes the people that have that path end up sometimes where you described, where maybe they followed the map and they went,
some people do.
Yeah, this map didn't really kind of get me what I thought I was going to get. And it leads to a later in life shift of, well, now how do I take these skills and apply it in different ways?
Totally. And I think it's a great segue. I'll sort of share how like the first little prototype we had for our product, actually, for GMC Do, was around just that.
Because you're a music producer and then change gears.
Yeah, and it's around pathing, actually. And I'll give you, I mean, so basically, just to give you a sense of why this is important, why I care about this, is I was also sort of like this like armchair psychologist, and I studied psychology at WashU in St. Louis in college. And so there's that other theme too of just like a deep desire to like help people and to unlock human potential, to be there for people, to nurture them, which shows up in how we create our team and how we support them, how we support our clients, how we have a lot of customer intimacy in all that we do with our company. But that's really, along with sort of that mentorship side of things and just that theme throughout my life, has always been really important to me, man. It's really a critical piece that I think led to, again, you can look back and see how all the pieces came together. But at the time I was like, after I had my degree in psychology, and I did double minor in economics and business at the Olin Business School at WashU. So yeah, I did. But it didn't really make sense. I had an internship in music, actually, and I hated it. Then I did marketing at Stanley Kaplan right out of college, and then eventually got into music production in Atlanta, and then moved to New York to do that and pursue it. And I did really well, like, by standards, but and it was fun in my 20s,
by American standards of this is what good looks like. It's like, on paper it looked fine, but it wasn't fulfilling. Yeah, turning your crank.
I was at the nexus of three like industries in advertising, film, and music. Each of them of themselves are beautiful from an artistic standpoint, but there's a little bit of ego in each of them. So can you imagine working at the nexus of all three of those? Like how much, how intense that would be. And so I was just like, I could handle it because I have that kind of personality to be able to kind of, brush things off and deal with it. But I was like, what? At some point I was just like, this is crushing my love of music, right? And it really did, man. And that it
no longer was a passion. It was like, well, now this is just a job. Like, and I can see it squelching it. So then, how does that then transform to, where does the idea of, hey, you know what we should do? We should create a talent development platform, because that's a pretty big shift.
It is. And there's a couple of pieces in between. I mean, I'll just quickly say, like, so I did a music production thing. I was kind of figuring things out. I did a lot of consulting. I was basically building companies for other people, helping them grow and make money in music and other ways. And I really, in retrospect, I was sort of cutting my teeth in a safe way. But I also have a bit of a
low risk. You didn't have to go in on it, and you're helping other people, but you're learning along the way, which is, again,
and I've always had vision and yes, exactly. Sorry. Yeah. And so I was doing that. Obviously there's no lack of energy between you and I, man. So I was doing that, but I also was like, you know what? Not in an egotistical way, but like, I just have vision and like, I want to express that. So it got to a point where I needed to do my own thing. I ended up starting a business. A quick story, called My Daily Thread. It was early days of Groupon, man. And like, we actually researched interesting business ideas. My co-founder and I, who's one of my best friends from growing up, and we found out about Groupon. They were like 8 employees or something. And we're like, this is really interesting. This will work well. I worked in music. He worked in fashion. We're like, these are lifestyle businesses. We can sell lifestyle companies, but create a different model. And we did. And instead of like crushing companies like Groupon, because they had way too many deals, and they literally they closed businesses, man. It wasn't good. We would tell
because it just wasn't any, it was completely sucking
it was all volume. Yes, it was all volume. And what we did instead was, and the tipping point became a gimmick, dude, in like 3 months. We even reached out to them cold and said, hey, do you want to work together? They sent us a contract. They saw what we were up to. They loved it. and they wanted to hire us on as like employee 8 and 9, and we didn't do it. And then the joke is like, my wife and I would like cry in a glass of wine, like, oh, I could have had like millions from that. But like, it's not about the money. But I mean, I made the right decision. It didn't feel right. We wanted to
like
do
that person that turned down Apple stock when it was in the garage. You're like, ah, oh, man.
But I wouldn't be here talking to you, leading Dream Studio, if I'd done that.
Right? And can you imagine a world where you weren't spending today talking to me?
No,
it would have been.
Just that alone
would just be a tragedy.
It would be absolutely tragic. Right. That's the main thing that we got to remember. So yeah, man. So I started the company. We would like tell again, the supportive, nurturing thread. We would tell I've been a chief creative officer and like a creative director for years as well. So I always had this. I'd be writing blogs or overseeing photography or doing the photography. So I've been involved in those creative things my whole life, even with my wedding, man. Like I'm very particular too. People joke about that. I saw like the font was.
I noticed backstage when you were setting up your like background.
Yeah, I was getting things all set up exactly. So I noticed that the font was a pixel off, and I called him, and my wife was like, "Dude, you're nuts!" But like I had them move it. So I have both that feel for like being the architect, but also the details, that zooming in and zooming out. Yeah, man. So we would like tell a cool, compelling story about like a guy who like. Or a woman that ran like a salon or a restaurant, and their charity that they did, or something cool they were doing in the community to support and nurture people around them. And guess what? We would be able to sell clients that Groupon couldn't, because we were supporting these businesses. And guess what else happened? The businesses grew. And so we had an interesting learning experience, because we sold that company, and like all this crazy stuff happened where we didn't get the back end deal because then they sold. So we hit our heads in every way possible, man. I think that's the nut of it, is like, I did this first entrepreneurial journey. Listen, as an entrepreneur, you and I was a little late in the game. I was in my like late 20s, early 30s. But I'm a late bloomer, and which is cool. And I dig that. I needed to find that maturity in my own way and that wisdom. And I'm happy with that. But like, we hit our head in every way possible. And you either take those learnings into your next thing, or you just don't.
Yeah.
And we did. And so like all the things that I did wrong, it's very prescient, man. When things come up, I'm like, oh wow, I don't want to do it like I did that thing last time.
Yeah.
And
failure is life's greatest teacher. It really is. But again, it's a choice you make on whether you're going to take those failures and go, am I going to do something with it?
Yes.
Or am I going to smash my head into the next wall the exact same way, because I'm convinced that, well, maybe that wall just was the wrong wall to smash my head into.
Right. And it's a messy process. And this is all that it's thematic, because like, I think another theme of why this is so important to me is like, I've always been someone that's worked on my own self-awareness and myself, like whether it's through yoga, meditation, therapy, like all of it. I'm constantly trying to evolve like who I am as a person, to be a better father, to be a better husband, to be a better friend, a better leader. And that is so critically important. And I'll quickly get to the story about how I met my co-founder, because it was vitally important to him. So to kind of tail off of the other business, I got out of the business. I'm like, what am I going to do now? And I was consulting for a while, and that's a whole other thing, but I won't go into all that detail. Basically, my wife sent me this email about, let me backtrack. She told me about, she does foundation work. So she would give money to nonprofits basically. And she was doing these big foundations in New York City when we were living there for a while. And she told me about this, the Queen's Library System she was giving some funding to. And she's like, Jeremy, it's not just a bunch of dusty old books anymore. Like, they have great programming and they have technology. You'd love it. Like, just meet the CEO. And she made that connection, which was great. And he and I hit it off. Long story short, I do like a little less than a year of consulting with them to like reimagine their digital products. Created this beautiful digital product, which has its own backstory, but it was really proud of that. Impacted a lot of people right after Storm Sandy. This is around 2012. People that didn't have connection with Wi-Fi. And we created this tablet for all these resources for jobs, for all different kinds of backgrounds. And they could find things based on who they were, what was most important to them.
To really help them grow in their professional journey.
In their lives, it could be professional journey or in lives. Any kind of learning. At that time, it was any kind of learning. But the whole UX was centered around, and the thematic thing that I helped the team come up with was, who am I, and what,
and it was designed to be off the grid. I mean, it was designed to be.
It was designed to and it had to be, because it was a gift from Google, where the rule was it had to be just like it
had to just work. It couldn't be like, oh, it just has to work.
That's it. You couldn't access anything else on the device, because they donated these devices. It was like a game show. It was a challenge, but we made it.
Yeah, that sounds like the kind of fun, kind of like, okay, how are we going to crack this nut?
Yeah, and Yes, and that really from a design standpoint, from a user experience standpoint, that those forcing agents, man, I'll tell you, like I'm looking back now, reflecting on that, wow, how powerful is that to then be in a company that you end up bootstrapping? Because we did get some investment in the first company, My Daily Thread I told you about, and with Dreams You Do, we ended up bootstrapping. And I'll tell you a little bit about that Genesis story because I think it's neat, and it's a neat sort of segue out of this. So I did a bunch of online learning. I'll call it digital transformation consulting with Queen's Library.
Sure.
I then was able, all sort of by just me meeting people and being sort of out there and excited and passionate, kind of like you and I are here today. And I met and connected with and ended up consulting with Kripalu Center for Health and Yoga, which is one of the foremost yoga retreat centers in the country. Helped them with a lot of their online learning, like positive psychology and those kinds of things. And every step of the way, like I had these new ideas. I would go for a weekend every 3 weeks and, for a couple of days of work and then stay there and do a retreat. It was amazing. And I would wake up out of Shavasana, like in yoga, and I would have these ideas and literally draw it on a napkin and I'd bring it to the CEO and talk to him. And he's like, we just want to do like a new, like really expensive website. And it's like, it's okay. That wasn't their thing, right? Like doing technology wasn't their thing. So that was their idea of like what was good.
Yeah,
no judgment.
And just, I think anybody who listens or watches this can relate to those moments where you have these brilliant moments of creativity where you go, hey, like I've completely reimagined the possibilities of what you're trying to do. And sometimes you get kicked in the teeth. Sometimes people are like, yeah, that's nice. No,
but no,
I really wasn't.
No, we got to replace our air
thanks. And you're like, what? It can be very deflating. You're like, what? How do you not see that? And you're like,
no, at the time, it's definitely demotivating, but which is why you have to kind of be a little bit nutty to be an entrepreneur, right? Because you gotta, I think Andreessen, from the famous VC firm once said that entrepreneurs have two emotions. They toggle between elation and terror, and that's it. And I can fully attest to that, my friend. So I took all those learnings and those ideas, and as you talk about this, man, it kind of inspires me to reflect and say, hey, I really saw the opportunity to connect people with their learning. You would go to Kripalu as an example, and then you'd be so stoked, and then you'd leave and you didn't have a connection to the community, to the content anymore. It just dissipated.
And
I was like, there's got to be a better way to
event. You went. That's
it, and it's gone.
You had all this warm fuzzy. There was these moments of creative and then it was like, whoop, it died on the vine.
And then they wondered why they had some like yearly attrition, right? And I was like, there's got to be better ways to keep that connectivity with the humans involved, with the content, with reflecting and practicing things. And so these seeds started to form, which will come full circle later in the combo, but it was amazing, man. And so I did all that, a bunch of different consulting gigs. And then ultimately, then my wife emails me at the end of like kind of fall of, we're coming up on, what is this going to be, 10 years? Is that right? Yeah. 2013. We are in 2023. Yes. And so she's like, I had coached, as part of this process, I got involved with coaching and being a part of hackathons. So if people aren't familiar with the hackathon, briefly, it's mostly around technology, but it could be around other subjects. You get together over a weekend or 3-4 days, you form teams with different, and you build something. You build like an MVP product. Yes, and you crack problems. And in this case, it was a conference called The Feast. Now, I had coached hackathons, but I never participated. So she emailed me this thing. I'm like, this looks pretty cool. I'm talking to Andrew. I'm like, yeah, this looks cool. I decided to participate, and they had 3 challenges. One was health, one was veterans, one was learning. So I participated in the learning challenge because I had come out of this work with Queen's Library System and Kripalu and some Carnegie Hall, these other really renowned organizations I was working with, which is amazing, phenomenal start to that part of my career. And it really turned me up, man. I was just like super excited about it. And I'm in this room and with the people that were in the learning challenge, and we're talking, and I hear this guy speak, this guy Josh, and I'm like, now mind you, I chose the pathway of more the architect and vision and sort of the CEO kind of role, which became to be. Though I had always thought, because I'm sort of a math guy and a music guy, and those things combined to maybe being a developer. I think I had the capacity to do that, but I just never, I never dove deep into that. So I'm looking for like 10 or 12 years, man, for this dozen years to find my like partner as a developer. I had other ideas in the music industry around creating product, and I never could meet the person. And it was always a very big challenge, right? And so I hear this guy.
I know exactly the feeling you're talking about, where it's like, you need that second half.
Oh my God.
And you just don't
I don't
know
want to do it alone.
What it is.
I'm a believer in collaboration. Bottom line, I hear this guy speak. I'm like, something just hit me, and I'm very instinctual too. And energetically, everything, I'm like, I got to meet this dude. And I went after him to speak with him. we connected, we heard each other, and he's, if he was here, he'd say too later, like, I approached him first, but we heard each other and just love what each other had to say. We formed a team, man. And that weekend we had this amazing designer. We got really lucky and we created this product and I named it Dream CDU that weekend. And the neat thing is the challenge was around high schoolers and the disconnect around like,
because that's what I was going to ask. Like, what was the challenge that you were tasked with solving?
So it was a MacArthur-based challenge. I always joke, like, I wish they would have been able to provide some kind of money for the winner. But there's so many intricacies there that my wife explained to me again recently over lunch. I could briefly share, but like it was fine. But they supported this challenge and sponsored it. I'm not sure what sponsorship meant, but it was very cool because they're a renowned organization, and I'm not like disparaging them in any way. Love you, MacArthur. They do great work. But it was just fun memories. And so we built this product, and the challenge was around learning for high schoolers and internships.
Okay.
But we took that a step back and said, wait, there's this big disconnect between what's happening in the classroom and what people might do in their career. So that goes right back to the earlier part of our conversation, the path, your meandering path, and you don't know what you want to do. And we
assume it's always ABC, and it's not.
It is not 85% of the time, man. It's not. It's confusing. Yeah. So we're like, there's something here. We can make a synapse fire earlier on, right? A lot of research has been done at the critical age, like right around middle school into high school. All of these changes are happening. Neuroplasticity is changing. Obviously, we know it cements more at 25, but these changes are really taking effect at that age, which I found fascinating. Big part of the learning journey and research we've done over the years. And so we know it's a critical age to reach people that, especially in areas where they don't have mentors, they don't have role models. So we really care deeply about that, man. That's another part of this thread, is caring deeply about people and all walks of life, right? And so we decided to say, and I'll never forget, we had this deck and the slide was like, just like super simple, like a teacher with like a, just sketched out, or an illustrated teacher with like a, kind of a pointer in a classroom, a big equal sign with an X, and then like the globe. And that was this first slide. Like, there is a disconnect. And I was the one who, by the way, I got really sick when we had to present. So we won it, and we ended up winning the challenge, but we had to present our thing. I had to, I got super sick and they put me up in the VIP room and I was taking a nap too. They were so cool. The people at the feast, they became close friends. It was such a cool story. So I'm presenting this thing and it was just magical, man. And we had this epic party after, where they had this group from Canada come in and they had all these speakers that these big boom boxes that they'd centralized. I can't remember the name of it. It was incredible. And we're partying throughout the city with the central music system with these speakers everywhere. It was just an incredible experience. So Josh and I met. I just wanted to give the groundwork of how magical it was. But like we took this seed and it became a thing. And so we created this product. And as I was saying earlier, the first product was, and it's the idea of Dream CDU, was you dream what you want to be in high school. Then you got to see people in your local community that had similar interests to you. So you basically put in your interests into this interest picker.
You take it from intangible, kind of ethereal, 100,000 foot. Then you start to say, hey, let's see what this looks like again, so that you can test and validate along the way.
And we scraped 300,000 LinkedIn profiles when not to sell, so we didn't do anything illegal, but like before they sold to Microsoft. So it was, again, a moment in time when you can do that. You could never do that now. They wouldn't let you do that. But a kid could put in their interest literally on this little app we created. And I mean, my co-founder's a genius. He's a unicorn, beautiful person too. And we the design was great. And you could literally, pretty magical, like in a hackathon, you could literally put in your interest and you could see a very basic path of people and their journeys. And then it landed on just like a design, because we couldn't do the last part of like, it would land on like a job shadow or an apprenticeship at that company with that person, intimating
something
what
that
the full cycle.
You actually do.
The do, man. And the do, and here's a great, so this is like the sock, which is walking a dream, and like the top says Dream CDU, and so we can talk about the socks if you want a little bit, but like I'll just tease it because we talked about the socks. But we can hold off on that for a second. But the do in Dream CDU is a big one for us, man. Constantly prototyping, constantly listening and
taking it from head knowledge, from conceptual, from what in your head is, to you actually need to experience things.
That is our DNA. So the dreaming part is massive. And I used to be big dreaming and vision and didn't know how to put that together in my 20s as much. And I realized, like, vision's great. Let's zoom back to the present moment, see what's possible, and do. And then there's been lots of fun things where Josh, my co-founder's mom, always says,
so what's interesting about this, about what you just described with this, though, and some of the parallels that I capture as I listen to people share stories and things like this, is even that process, okay, of what you just described of helping people go through that process, distinct of maybe what particularly they're focusing on, is actually building a critical business skill, because helping people go through the process of taking a big idea or something that you, again, have dreamed up or thought, hey, how, and saying, now what do I do with that? Because honestly, I see this in business all the time. One of the biggest disconnects of people going from strategy to execution is people struggle with, oh, I've got this idea, but I really don't know how to carry it forward. So even underneath what you're describing with Dream See Do, you're really actually building a core skill for people around business of being able to say, how do we take you from concept to execution in a meaningful way for what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, man. And I mean, that's been our whole business. I mean, literally, you just kind of defined like our business trajectory, which I can get into a little bit. Absolutely. I mean, at a meta level, what we allow in the product in many ways, because listen, I mean, you probably know this because you have so many conversations with folks. It is very, very, very rare, and I'm humbled by it all the time, every day, that you take something like this from a hackathon into an actual business that is growing. And, and we, based on my prior experiences in my business, we decided to bootstrap this thing. So just finishing that story, I'll explain. So Josh and I had this concept, and we created this product, and we won this hackathon. And I went 2 months later to visit him in SF. There was something there. The rest of the team kind of folded back. Like, we wanted to keep our designer. She just wasn't an entrepreneur, which is totally cool. And it was a big moment where she was like very upset, and she wanted to do it, but she couldn't. It was cool. So we took those designs and we kind of weaned those and used those for a couple of years. And we were selling things in education. So I went to Josh in SF. We talked about it. Within 4 months, man, he moved to New York to be with me to do this thing. So it was the dream. I mean, we were all in right away. We just knew there was some magic there, and it's been a very up and down, but journey since then. But it started there, and he moved to New York, and then of course my wife and I decided to leave like 6 weeks or 2 months later to have our first kid. So he followed us a little bit to Connecticut. We're going back and forth between Connecticut and New York, and it was an incredible journey. He was there in New York for 2 years with me, and that's how it started. So it's very rare, and we stayed committed to it because we started putting together clubs in schools, in communities that, with kids that really did not have all of the.
Okay, so in the early days, you really were primarily working with
first year and a half
the youth.
Yes, okay. And we were doing clubs in Newark, and in Brooklyn, and in Oakland, and we to prototype. So really in person, man. So this has been a thread. And I look back, and even recently, it's of like deep connection and deeply prototyping in a human-centered way with the people we want to work with to truly understand their needs. And I think that's a theme that I'd like to share and unpack a bit. It's just there's a different way to create a technology company where you can deeply connect with people and then use those learnings to figure out, if you're a SaaS company, for instance, how do you then scale that in a way you want to scale, And you don't have to just try to throw money at it right away.
There's sometimes this idea that technology is in competition with that. And I personally live at the intersection of going, no, it doesn't. It's a paradox. It seems like you'd have to choose, but you actually don't if you're doing it well.
Yeah, and my belief is, like, if you just focus on volume, at first you miss the boat of being able to. It's hard of being able to really retain your values and stick to your guns about creating something innovative and really working through the process. You're really working through it and doing it and learning and growing and trying. We had 13 different industries, man, because our biggest strengths are like creating innovative, interesting products using that human-centered approach and the relationships we form. So because of that, we had a lot of interest in our original products. We were selling things within a year. But like we quickly realized that the education industry for directly to youth, we were probably the first product to do this kind of synapse between like what happens in high school and what you want to do in your career. I've seen dozens of really cool products since then. We chose to back off from V1 GCDO in 2015, early 2015, to move to adult learning, mainly because it just wasn't. It was a saturated market. It was very hard for us, and our other use case, even at the hackathon that we won, was around adult learning. We just kind of had put it on the back burner, but we saw a big need in adult learning at the time. It was
it's significant. I mean, it's what you're talking about in terms of the gap. And what's interesting is my background was in elementary education. I taught middle school for a period, and there is this idea sometimes that adults are so much different than kids, and really they're not. There's so many parallels between the two.
Yeah.
And so the learnings from that, but again, the opportunity that you're describing, I mean, the number of conversations I'm in with business and HR leaders where this is a huge gap for employees. And it's a business problem now because companies are going, how do we help people bridge this gap? Because they're leaving or they're not moving forward to meet the needs of the business, or it's an engagement problem. It's a retention problem. It's a business innovation problem. And the assumption that, oh, well, you're a grown-up, you know how to do this.
Especially with leadership and management, man. I mean, like,
yeah,
like with leaders and managers, like you're not meant to be that. I mean, you may have the propensity and some of the skill sets, but that requires coaching. That requires peer learning and mentorship and things that I have naturally gravitated towards, but not everybody does that. And so that part of the cycle is, but in any career, right? And so, and I think the other thing I'll add, man, is like, listen, by starting in high school, we had this interesting sort of self-selected forcing agent to say, we want to focus on like a very lightweight and beautiful design because these kids are not going to do anything else. Like they're used to beautifully designed consumer products.
Oh yeah, consumer grade. They're used to consumer grade stuff. They're not used to corporate apps.
No, we can't. So that actually created this focal point, which I've always cared about too. And so is Josh. We're very focused on creative, a very lightweight, beautiful design, man, which has been a thread of our product all along in the DNA. Okay. So I credit a lot of that with the original origins.
Going back to what we were saying though, and I think this is one of the dangers for folks listening that I see in organizations all the time, is it's easy to assume that, well, people are adults, so they know, and then fill in the blank. They already know this. They're already aware. And time again throughout my career, there's a lot of things that even if people conceptually in their head have the head knowledge, the practice, one, they lack the practice to actually have done it before, and they may just not be comfortable with it, which comes through experience. And a lot of times companies make these false assumptions about what people can do or what they already know that actually is really holding them back. So you leaning into that, I think, is an important factor because it is a big market opportunity that often gets overlooked.
Yeah, and we define this early days as like experiential learning, Dream, See, Do, the doing part being really important. We created like nomenclature early days, 2016, 17, like calling it like online learning communities, man, stuff that people did not understand. Things have obviously gone through a massive paradigm shift since the pandemic hit, but our language was too mature, I think, at the time, and we needed to learn how to match. You and I talked about this sort of in the green room.
Yeah, I was going to say some of the words you're using at that time frame, people didn't get it, so we had to reduce community. What's a community?
It comes down to the lowest common denominator of like, this is an LMS or this now is an LXP, which I told you is like, we're defining it more as like a talent or people development platform now as we've matured, which I don't think is really out there as much in the common nomenclature. It's more like an LMS or an LXP, but we're not trying to be like a corporation's cornerstone, right? Like we talked about that earlier too, which we can tease out a little bit more later. But yeah, man, it was experiential learning. And our 3 pillars early on, I think I was alluding to this earlier, were always connection, practice, and reflection. And it was for 8 years, man. And it was like 2 years ago. And I'm like a writer, I've written blogs, I've been an editor, I've done all these creative things. I'm sitting there, I think, writing a blog a couple of years ago, and I'm like, oh my God, this is CPR. Like, imagine that marketing moment, like CPR for your training and coaching. I'm like, why did it take me 7 effing years or 8 years to figure this out? And I go to my team and I'm like,
what I like about that though, is you didn't reverse engineer it. Cause I do see that happen a lot of times.
It was sitting there.
Make up an acronym and then they're like, okay, what words can we fit into this? And
no way. It was sitting in front of my face.
No. So I think it's beautiful that
it took me 8 years.
The opposite. Yeah. Yeah, no, that you put it together and then you like lined it up and went, hey, wait a minute, that makes a really,
and then we're creating videos and ebooks about research. Yeah, exactly. Now, DSD has come out of Dream, See, Do because the name Dream, See, Do, people, it's funny, juxtaposition. People have always loved the name because they kind of get it. But then people have said like Dream, See, Do, like the Sea Do, like the watercraft, or like all these funny things, bro. It's hilarious. And so we kept the name. We've thought about changing it, but every time we do, we ask our audience, and they're like, no, don't change it. So DSD came out of an acronym because it's easier to pronounce. So that's another story. It naturally came out. So there's people that call it DSD. But no, the CPR thing, man, was incredible. And I say that because it's really around this experiential thing, really around this engaging together and creating an engaging environment. Because when we started Dream Studio, when we did our market research, Christopher, we saw these platforms. And listen, when Blackboard came out in 97, brilliant. Watershed, man. It's like they changed the game. Like it never happened before. But unfortunately, most platforms have not really advented a lot beyond that
many
since
have
then.
not.
And it's unfortunate because of the way that the system is set up to be focused more on like bigger sales and things of that nature. I don't need to get into all that, the reasons why, but we really focus on, we want to truly understand what's needed. And we fundamentally believed, and we did all the research to prove, it's because it's all around flat and passive content dissemination. And that has not very much changed. And that's not going to create an engaging
standpoint. From an industry standpoint, that is, I actually had a panel right before this where I talked about the fact that as an industry, we have largely over-indexed on this for a long time, and that has not changed. And so while we iterate and we, innovate on the content experience, it largely still sits in two dimensions. Yep. And as a result, a lot of the technologies that end up supporting it, they're focused on that because it's like, well, if that's what people are doing, then that's what we're going to support, which creates a really poor user experience. And it's actually not good learning because that's not really how you learn. You don't learn through flat 2D experiences where you go, well, I watched or experienced a thing. Now I know how to do it. Is it a part of the process? Sure, but it's not the end game.
No, and it goes back to your other point about, we just expect people like, oh, here's a thing. They're adults. They should know it or learn it. Well, if you can't in this world where things are so digitally oriented, and and you're not sure if you're going to be in person or not, when the pandemic happened and those kinds of things, you need to create a blended experience that can be cohort based, where you really involve peers if possible. It doesn't have to be a peer based, but that's very powerful. And so those pillars of being able to connect in multiple ways with a facilitator, with a coach, with peers, with your leaders or managers, being able to practice something and reflect. We've done all the research. I found this beautiful writing partner who's become part of our team, a PhD, who wrote about social capital, man, which is so cool. It's the idea of like collaboration to create knowledge. So like that there's this arc, like this 25, 30-year arc, like within like commerce and industries, that's kind of starting to articulate where we're sort of reaching that with our platform. And he saw GMC News, he's like, oh my God, you literally are the platform that's sort of embodying my research. And so we're writing all these white papers now around all of the research around connection, practice, and reflection that create our own learning model, which we call the CPR learning flywheel that we've trademarked. And that creates a DNA and an environment where people are really engaged. And we're constantly, that's the DNA of our platform. We're constantly creating features where you can reflect asynchronously, but people can comment on that. You can engage in a learning arc online, like in a live group coaching call or one-on-one coaching calls. That could be in person or online, and it's all codified in DreamCDo, but it's a very different approach from the ground up, right? So everything we create, want it to be elegant and beautiful and easy to use. But it's, I think, again, to your point, like juxtaposed to the industry standard, which is very flat. When folks see the platform, they're like, oh my God, like, where have you guys been? But we're this little guy that's sort of like finally like growing to a point where we're making some noise, I think. But it's been a journey, man. It's been hard. We chose that path so we could create something different. And And
I was going to say, what's interesting about this, and I'm curious your take as you've gone into this, because, if you look at a lot of the research out there, you'll see a lot of times it's not that people don't have a desire to grow. They feel pressed for time, or they say, and to me, this is always like, it's an indicator. They're pressed for time. And to me, I always look at that and go, no, when people are pressed for time, it means they see the other things they're doing as more important than whatever it is you're presenting. Yeah. And when we talk about this 2D flat experience, I'm never surprised that people often don't prioritize it over some of these other things. Because in my experience, when I've been involved in building or delivering or deploying the rich experiences you're talking about, you still have to overcome some of the barriers. But once people start to understand that that is really what they're getting out of this, it's amazing how people will find time to engage with these. They will make time for some of these things because they realize the richness of the experience, and the things that before they're like, oh, I'm too busy to do that. But because of how the industry has been, we often have to overcome that because people automatically assume, oh yeah, this is going to be a different kind of experience. I've heard that before. And then I've gone and experienced the same thing I've always done. And I think I'm curious, as you see that, it's a shift for organizations to have to change their way of thinking and their way of operating to deliver what you're describing. because
agreed. And
it's typically not how things work.
Yeah, we've experienced that. And what I would say is, and it's interesting because it's like sort of one of the purposes of the conversation, you know, today was about like, what is the purpose of a modern learning platform? And that's really what our exploration is about and what we're creating, Christopher. And I think for us, it's creating that engagement, because those experiences that are 2D are demotivating. And it's no surprise why like stats of like, you know, 7 to 15% completion rates across all LMSs, and only 25% of like leadership training as a whole is retained and is aligned to, you know, strategic initiatives at corporations, because they're experiencing a lot of these 2D experiences.
Well, and then stack on top of it, when you talk about what you did with Dream See Do and kind of the mindset and philosophy behind it, even if you can create an extraordinary experience, sometimes that connection and relevance is not there for people because you haven't walked them through the journey of what is that vision you're casting?
Yes.
How does this then connect? Then now, how does this experience connect to it? So you may create, and that's where I've seen people create really, really solid experiences, but then be frustrated when they go, well, but people aren't really like engaging with it. And it's like, well, that's because you didn't do that work to help them connect the vision of what they're trying to achieve, the vision of where they're trying to go, and going, that plus this gets you there. You get that equation right, people will engage and make it a priority, but it's not an easy task.
No, it's messy. You're entirely right. And that's exactly
very messy.
That's what we're doing right now. We know that, and we're not trying to do the short circuit answer, man. We're literally, we've created a new product called Bonsai, which is fun. I kind of named it the other summer. Not this summer, but the summer before. We've been working for a year on a new product because our clients have been providers like thought leading Goldman, you know, various organizations that are thought leading providers of talent development, and thought leaders in their own sort of fields of discipline for like 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right? Okay. And so for them, it's been challenging. They know they want to scale their work. And some folks like Goldman, as I mentioned, they've done really well in Dream See Do, and they're a newer client to us, a client partner, we say. And we, again, it's that customer intimacy. We call them client partners. It's like, it's even in our language, right? We care about that. Yeah. But it's challenging to move from when you're in person delivering, stand and deliver, to a blended environment. So what we've articulated towards is, how do we create cycles of where we help them with the design, the blended design, and we have competency and expertise in-house to help folks understand how to coach or manage in a hybrid environment, man, which is huge. Okay. So usually it's a transactional thing. It's a SaaS platform. You have someone just out of college trying to explain. Yeah,
that's your question. Which is a big gap, because you will get organizations that will get these tools that, and I know a lot of them out there, that some of these tools, they are well designed. They have the best intentions.
They don't use it.
But the people they are sold to do not understand how to work it.
Yes. And the company's selling it.
People going, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Like what? Yeah. You're saying these people going kind of like, what do I do with this? I always said, like,
well, and it's like, I have this idea, but I don't know how to do it. Going back to even the whole philosophy of Dream See Do. I have this vision, but like, I've never seen it in practice. I've never done it before. Perfect. And maybe now I have the vehicle to do it, but I don't even know where to start. And that's where you run into these, where you'll see people go, wow, I tried and it didn't work. And it's like, well, I think there probably were some gaps along the way that would have helped you close that gap.
Yes, and it's funny because you mentioned that, and it's another reason why we kept the name, because there's just these meta analogies of Dream See Do that kind of come up thematically in like the work. It sort of is emblematic, which is super neat. Just as a side note, but you're right, man. I mean, like, companies just sort of like they're volume oriented typically in SaaS. So I mean, in a nutshell, and there's a bigger conversation there, but. So there isn't that. We put our best people. We created a role called lead product advisor, who sticks with you from demo all the way through your experience, onboarding and beyond, to support you in customer success. All those roles at most SaaS companies, as you know, are broken up into different roles. So you're passed from person to person to person. Okay. And we went back to the old school, man. And it's like, no, you have that one person that you always have with you. And we believe that's meaningful.
It supports you through your experience.
They're educating you, yeah, but they're there to educate you and nurture the relationship and support you. What we've gotten better at is kind of shortening those cycles to help people get up to speed quicker, making sure that it's scalable enough for us. But we did a lot
versus offering the one tactical, like, you get 2 hours of webinars where we run you through how the system works.
No, you get a real person, and it's our best people. It's our best people, our best product knowledge people that are going to walk you through how to design this thing, give you feedback. We can add on deeper design if you want as part of a service offering to make sure it's sticky for us, but also make sure that you actually are successful. Now, ultimately, Christopher, it's up to the organization. What we have learned recently is that no matter how much we put into that, we cannot control who's going to be successful and who's going to. It's more about how they operationalize that. So we're in a moment where we're like opening things up, and we figured out a way.
But I think that's the challenge of any learning professional in general is you can only take people so far. So what you're experiencing on the SaaS end is the truth of talent development. You can only, as a talent development organization, take people so far. You can create the infrastructure, you can create the resources, you can create the opportunity, but at some point, they have to either do it or not do it. And I think the same is true with some of these really transformative SaaS products that really are doing powerful and innovative things. It's like ultimately, and I think this is my message back to practitioners and internal folks, is the technology cannot save you from the lackluster stuff that is often attributed to corporate learning. It cannot save you. The best platform in the world cannot save you from that. Can it be an enabler? Can it be an accelerant? And are there companies like what you're describing that are doing a phenomenal job of doing everything they can to make you successful? Yes. But ultimately, you have responsibility in that. And shirk that, you're doomed.
Yeah, man. And there are a handful of companies out there that are trying in different ways than us, which I really value, in the ecosystem, but not a lot, man. And as you know, and what I would say to that is like, so we really chose the pathway of deepening our relationships, as you can imagine, based on the conversation with our client partners, with the learners, to learn with them over the years, to create this experience, to kind of come full circle now where we figured out a way. So we were a higher priced option with a much higher quality, more engaging experience. Like, and we named that. We were in the market. And so now we figured out a way to be able to say, like, take that and vastly reduce the cost and now offer that to individual coaches again in smaller organizations that are providers. So we can build this cadre of very high quality facilitated blended experiences on Dream Studio and these various providers. The next phase for us and the bigger opportunity is to then connect them with organizations on the corporate side so they have an opportunity that's different than the flat learning of like a LinkedIn Learning or a Udemy, that is more like around kind of video content and so on and so forth.
No, which is actually, it's phenomenal. You're helping bridge that gap as well, because I even see this a lot on the practitioner side where they have lacked exposure to what good can look like. And so that's where you see a lot of perpetuating the same things on repeat is many people, when you go, well, okay, can you show me an example or can you give me an example of what an extraordinary experience is? Sometimes it's very difficult to find them. And so instead people go, oh, well, that's what it is. And it's like, well, no, but then people iterate and innovate around what they think good looks like that actually isn't good. So I think you actually offering that helps.
Yeah, and it forces them to cobble things together. Like, well, I want video from here, and I want a resource bank of resources here, and I want to be able to kind of do group coaching or live coaching or events, and it's all in 7 different platforms, man. And it's like that's what we see. Our clients come to us with 7 solutions
I know. It's
to cobble together, and you're like, how can that be easy to manage or feel good as a learner? It's like
I'm telling you, having worked with big corporate organizations, any one of the big dogs or even some of the medium small dogs who have started to build out their ecosystem, this really is the challenge that many practitioners find themselves in, where they're MacGyvering. They're attempting to MacGyver a meaningful experience. And it's like, well, you've got this and you got to go over here. I got this paper clip and this rubber band. And if I super glue it, maybe it'll work. And you can't manage it well. And the end user experience is catastrophic.
Yeah, man. And so that's been our main focus, Christopher, like the whole time, is creating that really, really engaging experience that has those tools in a beautifully designed way. And now we have all these providers that we're building, continue to build out that are on there. And that the goal is to say, hey, not only can we provide you this platform for this superior people development experience, purpose-driven corporation or whatever it might be, because that's where we want to start with folks that are ready, that are not at status quo, and eventually show use cases and case studies that worked really well to then get sort of the larger organizations on board that aren't quite ready, which is totally fine, and we get it, and we think that's a good process and a good kind of go to market.
Well, and I think what's going to be interesting about this, based on what you described, and even just listening to some of where you were based on the different timing of things, you've been ahead of where I think the industry often is, which is a challenging place to be. And I know a lot of founders who have been ahead of the curve. And sometimes that's some of the hardest places, because you're even just trying to get people to understand what it is you're doing.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? But what I think is going to be interesting, and not to make this an AI conversation, but I think largely some of the disruption we've seen coming on the heels of 2022 and 2023 is creating more opportunity and capacity for practitioners to start thinking differently and go, you know what? We don't just have to be a content shop anymore. We don't just have to be delivering these 2D experiences. And what would we do if we could do anything? And I, again, just talked about this before we connected today on a panel about the fact that AI is opening opportunity and capacity for people to ask those questions and to truly innovate and go, you know what? Maybe the way we've always done it, maybe instead of just looking at making iterative jumps in what we're doing, maybe we really should go back to the drawing board and say, what does an extraordinary experience look like?
Yeah, man.
I mean, I don't know a single learning practitioner that doesn't cognitively know that watching a YouTube video by itself will transform a person's behavior.
No.
We all know this. Nobody's going like, well, I disagree. I think,
but it's still so prevalent.
We all know. Yet it's so prevalent, but I think there's some real opportunity right now for us to go, hey, not only do we know this, but now there's technology that's supporting it. And we are going to be, in the coming years, having more capacity to do some of this.
Yeah, man. And that's what this bonsai experience is about. You know, we came up with this because like the idea was like, you know, bonsai is the art of growing and training plants in small pots. And so I love that metaphor of like, we're working on humans developing and like, you know, all the different ways you can think about that. And it's funny, man, we tried to look for a URL. We couldn't find anything with the right spelling. So we used one of these techniques where we took the S and made it a Z and called it Go Bonsai, which is fun. But really, man, it's, as you talk about that, that's really what we've done too, is we took our like 7 years of learning and we really started to mature in like 2019, right? Like a year before the pandemic. But we did a lot of prototyping, as you know, even in the adult space from 2015 to 2019, before we really made this a true mature company on our own, you know, work and sweat, blood, sweat, and tears. Is like looking at all that. We created we spent the last 8 months creating our bonsai design principles and creating like literature and a new site around like what this experience is. And you said this earlier, Christopher, and this is key. You can't just drop technology on people. I don't care if we think ours is better and our clients do. We know that, and we're going to come into our corporate engagements and frame it and say, this is why a bonsai experience is different. Here's the proof in the pudding from 7 years of work on our platform and all the great NPS scores and the great engagement scores that are blowing things out of the roof, which is great. But it's beyond that. It's the human connection that we can support you in your goals, bring in our providers with the, you know, beautifully married and dovetail to the features. And also we can create, our team can create your own bespoke things as well. So that full ecosystem that you want can be done, but at a reasonable price. Whereas like individual coaches and training companies that you're finding and trying to find as an L&D, it's expensive and chaotic, man. Like we're consolidating all of that for people into one beautiful experience that, by the way, we can easily with our API connect into Cornerstone for deep linking and SSO and all those things. And no one else is doing this because I don't know if they're willing to do the harder. I don't know. I just don't know. All I can say is we're willing to do the harder work to support that in our way of a scalable way, where we can have that customer intimacy, where we can spend those cycles, because you work so hard on learning what it's like to have those cycles of deep connection and support, where we can tighten those and we can still have more clients and support them to do that. And that's what Bonsai is about. So it's an experience right now. Then just to add to that point, to your AI point, we're adding on AI features around like, you know, giving coaches or practitioners or managers, like if someone does a reflection on Dream Studio to a prompt, like let's say there's a prompt, like how do you practice empathy? And then asynchronously you go off, Christopher, and you do a video reflection or a journal entry on Dream Studio. That goes automatically to your coach or facilitator or manager, and they can see that anytime. And now they can make a comment. So there's like this activation that happens even asynchronously.
You've got a feedback loop.
Yes, but now we add AI to that, and it gives you it takes the question and the response, it feeds it in, and it gives you automated ideas but we still want it to be really, really human-centered and very
human-centered. Yep.
So you still have to edit it, but you have an idea starter. We don't want to totally only use AI because we feel like having a human there.
And I think what you just described right there is a perfect example of how to use AI well. Because I think this is one of those things where sometimes the pressure and the tendency to, oh, AI can automate, and we can streamline this, and we can move things so much faster. And faster isn't always necessarily better. And I think that's one of the things that the ability to spark that creativity, that is a fantastic use of it, because oftentimes, and this is where AI plays a great job, it can look at these things and faster than often people can come up with, because it's pulling from a large language model and capturing all of human capacity in one thing. You go, based on that, what about these things? But then it's that mix of having the human look at that and go, I know the context, I know the situation, I know where I'm at, and now I'm going to evolve it to really meet the nuance of what I'm trying to accomplish. But you're really shortening that gap while preserving the human experience. And I think this goes back to what we've talked about through this whole thing, is that technology does not have to be in competition with the human experience if you're doing it right. If anything, it can absolutely enhance and unlock the possibilities of what an incredible human experience can look like.
Yeah, it's a dynamic synergy, man, but you have to approach it differently. And that's what I want to do for younger entrepreneurs, is to also talk about in forums like this. There's a different way of doing things. You have to commit in a different way. You have to be willing to take on different sacrifices and challenges, but the outcomes can be really profound. And the way that you'll feel when you have the fulfillment is beautiful. And so, like, if I answer the question, what is the purpose of a modern learning platform? It's really taking the time necessary to think about what is actually needed and to listen. And so what we're trying to do right now with corporations is we're not just jumping headfirst into the corporate. We've spent a year on customer development, and longer. We're going to continue to do this until we're ready, as we've always done, to really understand the discrete pain points and needs of either a leader or an L&D person or HR person at a corporation right now. And with their, particularly for us, managers and leaders, because that's a big focus for us around soft skills, because our tools are designed for that. But what do they really need? And why, and how is that not being served? And for the future of work, because there's remote leadership, there is, continuous learning cycles for young managers. There's all these AI and L&D, like we just talked about. How do you do these things? And that's where our level of expertise is as a company, that we can infuse into the process with the backing of all of our providers as well. And I think the purpose of any company out there trying to focus on a modern learning platform is move it out of 2D. Like, whatever you do, like, make it interesting. Find a thing that maybe combines AI because it's powerful, but don't do it just because it's trendy. Really prototype, go into it, be thoughtful, hold hands with people and learn together. It might take a little bit longer, but the outcome will finally be different, and then, and it creates a different.
Well, and I think that's such a great component as we come into the home stretch on this, to think about as you look at this, because for anybody watching and listening who's made it this far, I think there's always this, like, so what do I do with it? And I think, to your point, there's some of these, like, there's not a universal answer because everybody's in a different state, yet there are some universal principles behind that. And one of them is what you just described right there, is look at what you can do to take it from 2D to 3D. If you're going there, might it look different? Might what you do with it look different than some? Absolutely. And you're going to have to acknowledge the complexity and the nuance of your organization. But so long as you're saying we are committed to going from 2D to 3D, and what does that look like for us? And where can we lean into that? And how are we using the technology to further enrich the human experience versus dehumanize it? And to me, that's the biggest litmus test of technology is it enriching human experience or is it dehumanizing? And if you go for it.
I was saying, and do it with love. Because one of the first things we said early days was, like, all of these platforms out there, LMSs or what have you, they're ripping the humanity out of the experience. So I exactly, and, like, do it with love and bring that heart to it. We didn't get to talk. We got a next chat, man. We'll have to talk entirely about socks. Right?
We did say,
we
I
did say
know,
we're
I'm
gonna,
telling you, I know.
Our socks say
spoil it.
walking the dream on the bottom, but that'll be the teaser, but for next time. But
There
yeah,
you go.
there's something
There you
around
go.
socks and companies doing things that are different, but this has been such a fun time.
I know.
It flew by.
All right. Well,
So
yeah.
much fun.
Well, Jeremy, this has been an absolute pleasure. I told you we'd just be getting warmed up before we got to the conclusion here. So thank you so much. For those who are listening, this is a really important discussion about how we need to make this shift from 2D to 3D. And we actually have the opportunity and the capacity to do it now, and the technology is there to support it. Yeah. So, Jeremy, I love your story and I love this conversation. So thank you for making the time and joining me today.
Yeah, I had a great time. And thanks so much for having me. And yeah, look forward to seeing you again. It's great.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will be back next week.